Hello, I'm Elliot Margulies. I'm with the Mid-Penn Media Center. And during this time of sheltering at home, we're going to continue bringing you some programming using the new technologies that we have at our hands, which is, in this case, Zoom. And I'm with 4 local clergy members, local clergy leaders today. And we're going to be able to have an exchange with each other and find out what ways their roles have changed, what ways have their practices changed, and what are they hearing back from their congregants and their sangha. When I call your name, just give a wave so people will know who you are. I have Pastor Bruce Reyes-Chow of the First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. I have Rabbi Melanie Aron of Congregation Shir Hadash in Los Gatos. I have Reverend Dean Koyama, the resident minister of the Palo Alto Buddhist Temple. And I have Reverend Amy Zucker Morgenstern, the parish minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
First thing to ask is, how is the health of yourselves and your congregants? Are you experiencing any direct illnesses related to the coronavirus? So let me start with Bruce, and then we'll go to Melanie, and then Reverend Dean, and then Amy.
Sure. We've been very fortunate in, we believe we've had a couple of people who have had COVID-19, but were not able to get tested, are on the other side of it, and are healing and in some recovery and are self-quarantining. We've also had a couple of folks that have had negative results, but they're pretty sure they had it anyway. So that's kind of the testing kind of being unsure about that has been evident here. But we haven't had anybody, really fortunately, we haven't had anybody die from COVID-19 nor in the hospital. We have a lot of our folks who are in retirement communities where there are cases there, but we're so far pretty fortunate within our inner kind of first circle. We haven't had anybody impacted by it.
And Rev Dean, what about the Palo Alto Buddhist Temple?
Yeah, I've been fortunate that I've been calling many of our members. I've reached out to probably about 3/4 of my membership, and fortunately, I'm very happy to report that none of my members so far seem to have had any direct contact with anyone who has been suffering from either the symptoms of the virus or have been tested at all. A couple of my members, they were on a cruise ship. They did come down with some type of fever and sickness, but again, yeah, testing wasn't available to them, but they too are on the other side of it and are doing very well. So yeah.
Amy, how's the congregation at Unitarian Universalists?
Well, very similar. I've only know of one case that was a probable COVID, serious because somebody had an underlying health concern, but they're doing okay. And we've called around to everybody who's vulnerable. I'm filled with admiration that Reverend Dean has called most of his congregation himself. I had a real team of people doing that. And so we hope people will let us know. I do hear in our pastoral prayer time in the service, a lot of people are connected to people who have COVID elsewhere in the country. But we have been very, very fortunate in terms of this virus. Who knows, but I'm going to credit the county's quick action.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, I'm glad to hear an overall, not dire report, but it sounds like we're going to hear a lot about how shelter in place has changed things for you. And let's start with Bruce, because I know your congregation and yourself, you just had Easter last Sunday. So tell us how it was different this year.
Was that just last Sunday? Feels like it was about a month ago. It's been an amazing year this past week. Yeah, I think we shut down our campus pretty early. We've even before the county, put it in place. So our last service in person was March 8th. So we've had quite a bit of practice at this point. You know, I mean, it was different, but we've kind of taken the tack that we haven't canceled anything. Our community just is meeting differently. Easter was a blast. We had a great experience. I don't know, it's kind of hard to say how many people show up. We had about 130 logged in. So I'm guessing we had about 200 people total, just from various places around the world. I think the thing that has been interesting for all of our services, our Easter service wasn't that much different than our regular services, is you know, people's experience with online communion and doing communion you know, virtually. That's the most meaningful, I think, poignant experience in our worship service, and people kind of experiencing that together.
Can you describe that?
So with our communion service, with the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the cup, I basically tell everybody, bring something to eat and drink and show up, and I do the words and all that kind of stuff. And then everybody lifts up the bread to the camera. And so you see this kind of massive gallery view of everybody breaking the bread, pouring the cup. And so I think it is, we just met yesterday, our leadership council, and they said it's actually more intimate than our regular services, because in our regular services, we're still fairly traditional and everybody's face forward and you don't really see anybody. So that it is, and so that was a change, but that wasn't just about Easter. I think it was just more about what we're doing. I think the Easter thing was, a month ago, folks couldn't imagine that we were going to do Easter online. And I think that whole process of folks feeling okay with this working has just become more comfortable. And so we're probably anticipating July, August of possibly coming back in person. So this is just kind of our new normal.
And Amy, are you involved in any kind of Easter services?
We do. It's funny because very few people at the this particular Unitarian Universalist congregation, I think, probably identify themselves as liberal Christian, but Easter is still a big service each year. And like Bruce, it's really hard to know what the attendance is. We try to get people to check in, say who in your family is there, so we have some kind of count, but you know, not everybody does. It was very meaningful. It wasn't really different than the services that the previous 4 services.
Let's get a report on Passover, which was just recently as well, and that may involve you too, Amy. But let's go to Rabbi Melanie.
It was very different. First of all, Passover is not especially a sanctuary-oriented ritual. It's a home ritual, and people invite family and friends. And for many people, the idea of having their Passover dinner alone in their home was really very, very difficult. We did a Zoom Seder. We did training for people so that they could be enabled to do Zoom Seders with their own families. In Israel, it was very interesting to note that even among the Orthodox, permission was given. Wouldn't normally use electricity on a holiday like that, but permission was given because of the pain of people being alone to have families get together on Zoom. So I think people found it hard. There's no hugging. There's none of the smells of the foods that you prepare together. But there were also some positive things, which were that you can include people from all over the country. So families had people from Israel, from Europe, from Australia, wherever their family is scattered. And that was very meaningful to people. At our congregational Seder, we had somebody from Manitoba. I'm not sure how he found us, but we were glad that he found a Seder that he could be part of.
I can't think when's the last time I had a Seder with my sister and her family. So that was really lovely in its way. And I felt most sorry for my mom, who was all by herself in her apartment with whatever she cooked, but she was just so happy to have us together.
Weekly services, are there now some new elements to your weekly services?
Because we're bringing in guest musicians from all over the country to do music because we can, and we wouldn't be able to do that. The other piece that we're doing is every Sunday we have a different person from the community or national organization come in and give a word about offering, and an ability for folks to then support organizations who are doing much more frontline work than maybe many of my congregation is able to do. So we've taken advantage of the ability to use Zoom to bring people into the worship experience that we wouldn't really be able to do. The other piece that we've been able to do is to, there's so many of our younger folks who have gone to college or have moved away, you know, in their 20s, 30s, whatever, who are back at the church now. And we have families worshiping together for the first time in years. And we're like, okay, you're here, we're going to put you to work. So we have these folks who had never, like, so our two like on-site tech deacons on Sunday are three of our young adults who are working professionals, but they're really comfortable on Zoom. So they're kind of my chat room bouncers, and, you know, they're doing all kinds of stuff. And we've been able to reconnect with people, which has raised the question for us, what happens when we get back together? Because we won't have those connections anymore. So I think those are the things we've taken advantage of. And it's raised really interesting questions for us as a community, is what does this look like after shelter in place, which obviously is months from here. So
can you describe the music a little bit?
I as a Zoom person, I temper everybody's expectations about music down. I think folks see these edited videos where they have 10 people on a screen singing the same thing. And I'm like, that's way edited. That's not something that happens on Zoom. So we have our musician with a decent quality mic who just plays, and I mute everybody and people sing to themselves wherever they are. And that's your ideal. I wish it could be better on Zoom, but that's the trade-off.
I was thinking about how choral singing and just singing together as a congregation is one of the things that I miss really a lot. What I notice is how many people like Bruce, as in Bruce's congregation, who come who haven't been for a while because they moved, you know, they went off to college. Last week we had former members from Texas and from Hawaii who they get our email. And one thing that's happened since we were not live streaming or recording, we weren't video recording the service, is we're going to continue it afterwards. We're all clear, like, okay, we got the nudge from fate and now we know how to do this. We're going to keep doing it once we're back in person. But then too, the community will shift. There will no doubt be an online community and the people in person. And I'm thinking about how can I connect with the people who are far away or one way or another come to the online version and fit that into our ministry. So Unitarian Universalists aren't very good at getting our word out there. So it feels really great to think we can actually think of our ministry as being to whoever might find out about it far away.
For some of our members, this has been a real blessing. If they are housebound or they're infirm in some way, and it's very difficult for them to get places, or they've stopped driving, which in this community is a real burden. This has enabled them now to come to a lot of things that they didn't used to be able to come to. And how are we going to keep that going when we go back in the building? We also do some breaking into groups in the middle of worship, because it's important for people to talk to somebody when they come to the worship experience. Normally, maybe they would do that before worship started or afterwards when we had coffee and cake together. But you don't want it just to be, I came, I sat, I listened, and I left.
I'm a little embarrassed to say that I think here at our temple, we're kind of a little bit behind the times. Our last service was on March 8th as well. And then, we haven't been streaming, or we have been audio recording our services and putting them on a Facebook page, but then that was only limited to, I guess, people that were signed into our Facebook page, or I forget how all that stuff works. But last Sunday, the 12th, was our Hanamatsuri service, which is where we celebrate the birth of the Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha. And so again, I've audio recorded that particular service, and it was just me present, but I did the rituals, I did the chanting, and then I gave a message. And then we loaded that up onto our webpage to make it available for whoever wanted to hear that. I've been getting some good feedback about that, but unfortunately, we're just not at that point yet to be able to video record yet. But then at the beginning of this month, I started up my bi-monthly study class on Zoom, And that, and yeah, and I think like as Rabbi mentioned, it turned out that we were getting more people coming or joining us in the study class because they didn't have to drive back into Palo Alto. So I think in that sense, yeah, it is kind of a blessing, perhaps, that we need to figure out how to truly enhance and take advantage of it. Yeah.
I wonder, you've talked about some of these silver linings of people from other parts of the country joining and kids coming back home from college being part of it. How are you trying to figure out, or how do we inject the same sense of community that we used to have? And what measures can you take, or have you tried, or are you hearing about that might re-inject that level of community? Or do you feel it's happening, but in just different ways? Amy?
I think everybody's been really thrilled by how hungry they are just for that contact and how much it counts for. And I have too. I'm very used to online communities. I met my wife through an online community. I mean, it's not surprising to me that you can connect in a very deep way, only over the ether. But it's wonderful to see us making that transfer. At the same time, I'm really feeling the lack pastorally of just casual interactions with people. If I don't get on the phone and call people, or they're not at the service and I can chat with them at our coffee hour, pajama coffee hour, I don't just run into them. And I'm feeling like I need to do other things in order to keep in touch with the vast majority of people in the church.
I've added that element onto some of the work, is around like 5 phone calls, and every Sunday afterwards, I just kind of, I go for a walk and I just go down the list and call people. And I think that has helped me stay connected and let folks remember that we miss these casual times, these just times where you're just sitting in coffee hour or whatever, and you just chit chat about stuff. And so I always start with, there's no agenda and there's no ask, I'm just checking in. So that folks are like, okay, we're just talking. Because when the pastor calls, because that's not been the tradition, they're like, oh, they're asking me to be on a committee, something's going on, like something. I'm like, no, I'm actually just calling. It's fine. So I think that piece what became missing after all the intensity of the beginning, like that kind of the intensity of the starting. Then it was like, okay, so now how do we fill in the gaps? I know that was a piece for me. I'm like, oh, all right, here's something I should probably be doing. And I'm like, oh, so that'll be different. Like, I don't think I'll keep doing that when we get back in person, because we'll be interacting again. So I think that's one for us.
Do you have certain ways that either yourselves or members of the congregation or the Sangha can help those who are alone, or those who are more vulnerable for one reason or another, or they may be sick or unable to shop, or all those kinds of things? Are you playing a role on that level? Anybody?
So we do have a core of members who've been involved with calling other members, most particularly the older people or people who are shut in. And that's been important. And then a group of younger people who have been delivering things like matzah to people who can't get out and shop. And so we kind of, everybody's got their role. But synagogue is more than people gathering for worship. And I think it's those other kinds of things that aren't happening that are also a loss of community. Just the plain old social and celebrating and meals together. I think that's been what people miss. So we try to replace it with organized things like having people call each other, which is good both for the person being called and for the person making the call. But it's only a partial replacement of the social life of the community.
I'm wondering also about like little kids, because on Easter you have the hunt for the eggs, on Passover Seder you have stealing the afikomen, and if you're in New Orleans and the afikomen is in Palo Alto, that's that's a challenge. Afikomen's a piece of matzah that gets hidden. And so I'm wondering, is there any kind of special consideration about how do you keep little kids plugged in?
I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Yes.
But one, here's a silver lining. I think we had 2 Afikomen winners, which is usually unheard of. My daughter found ours and my nephew found theirs in New Orleans. One of the real delights for me for Easter was the Easter egg hunt is just such a big deal. And now my daughter's 13 and now she loves helping the little kids. And our Minister of Religious Education and his team came up with the idea of a virtual Easter egg hunt, which I know people are doing that in various ways. We had actual visible eggs. You know, I had one taped up behind me, and each time I appeared on camera, I'd have a different one. And I hope that was fun for the kids. Parents have to supply the chocolate themselves. But I've started reading a book online. That was what our Children and Youth Religious Education Committee said, you can do this. And I said, great. So I'm reading one of my favorite books, chapter by chapter, a public domain book, The Secret Garden. I don't know how many people will tune in, but there it is on YouTube for them.
Everybody's thinking,
families
Melanie.
are incredibly stressed right now for people who are home with kids, with job responsibilities. It's difficult, and the online learning for the kids is sometimes more theoretical than really effectual, and parents feel called upon to get engaged with that. So I'd say, even though we tend to think about the isolated members of the congregation as those who need help during this time, I think some of the most stressed people I'm talking to are parents who are trying to juggle all of this. And they want to convey to their children that this is okay, especially we have a preschool, so we have a whole group of preschool parents, that the grownups, have this, the grownups are going to take care of you, this is going to be okay. But as they get older, they want, more detailed answers. And right now, I think having to face uncertainty is what is most difficult for people. When will this end? Will we be back together in June, in September? Will there be school next year? The fact that things are so open-ended right now, it's hard for people to face that degree of uncertainty. And I think that's what is bothering people. So some people kind of make a decision in their mind about what's going to be, whether that is real or not. They find that a source of hope. Others are able to help their kids say, let's think about today. What are we doing today? What is the blessing in today? What is the pleasure that we're having in today? And trying not to plan too far into the future.
I think, what spurred on to do a webinar on death, dying, and ethics was because people were asking. They're like, there was an op-ed in the New York Times maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that was really poignant about, especially as folks we're really talking a lot about overwhelming of hospitals and ventilators and people's mortality, and wondering, do we help make decisions for the doctors? Like, do we say to somebody, if you have to choose between me and somebody who's 30 years old, please choose that? So there is these questions that folks are really struggling with. And then I think the other piece, the anxieties that are just manifested for everyone, but I think people are experiencing mortality, these very active folks just realizing that they're mortal, and their time here on earth in this form may be coming to an end, COVID or not. I think it's just raise that anxiety level, and everybody expresses it differently.
We're often kind of the first response where people will go to, even if they have therapists, or when they're thinking, I know I should go see a doctor or see a counselor about this, but first I want to bounce things off Amy. It feels safer or closer to home. So I'm getting a little bit more of that, even from people who have lots of other support.
Yeah, in my own life, my dad last month passed away, and he had been in hospice for a couple of weeks, and they're from a very Orthodox Jewish background. So I was with his wife and him in Florida for the final week, and there were probably 3-4 times that she called her rabbi for input, at least in that realm. there's a lot of questions that she felt she didn't know the answer to, like what do we do now? And so and in fact, there's a period of 7 days after the death where you sit Shiva, and I had left after the second day to come back home, but I understood that the rabbi called off all visits on the last day of it. And while I was with her, the rabbi had, this is just using the national headlines, the rabbi had said, okay, we fist bump, we elbow bump, we don't shake hands anymore. So we were doing that, and fortunately, I don't think anybody got sick from being at the Shiva, but in other words, everything's different. And I'm wondering if in your lives with the rituals that come up, maybe weddings have mostly been postponed, but you can't postpone a funeral or a Shiva. Are there rituals that you couldn't postpone other than what we already talked about with Easter and Passover that you've had to do differently? Yes, Melanie.
We have had deaths in the congregation, and so we had a memorial service via Zoom, very well attended and very emotional for everyone. And again, people were able to come from all over the world, which in this case was very meaningful. But it was hard at the end that you can't go and give everybody a hug as they're leaving the sanctuary. The limitations on people being at the cemetery are quite rigorous right now. We do Shiva, we do the visits in the house of mourning via Zoom, and we gather people for the prayers, via Zoom. I think it's not uncommon when someone is very ill or dying, even if people aren't so religious in their regular lives, to look for both comfort and also some organization, someone to tell them, what do I do now? And I personally think that having some kind of service sooner, rather than saying, oh, well, in the summer when we can all get together, we'll have a celebration of life. People do need something in the immediate period after the death, even if they're going to do whatever it is later on. So I've kind of been a proponent that this isn't everything and it isn't perfect, but we all need this now, right after the death, and then later we'll do whatever we're able to do later.
I've had some of my colleagues, one of my colleagues in San Francisco, and it's customary for us as in our Buddhist practice to go to the deathbed and actually conduct a service there on site as soon as it has happened. And he mentioned to me that what they did was that he and this is of course after all the stay-at-home policies were in effect. So he did it virtually. Somehow he did it virtually, where he was in the altar at his temple, and then they were able to conduct a service, at the bedside for the family. Another colleague of mine in San Mateo had to conduct a funeral service at the mortuary, where they actually did have the casket. Two members of the family were there at the mortuary, and they set up an iPad, I guess, and had it face the casket area, and they broadcasted that service to the rest of the family members. So people are being ingenious, and I think that's in trying to help cope with grief, and I think that we will do whatever it takes to get it, to help comfort them in that area then.
I think two things are really powerfully true. They're theological tenets for me. One is that the most important thing that we can be doing as clergy and as people of faith for one another is to offer our presence. And that is absolutely something you can do on the phone, on Zoom, to be listening and to just be say, I am here for you. Call me at 3 a.m. if you need me. That does not depend on being together. and that we are embodied creatures, and there's just nothing like a hug or a hand on the shoulder, especially when we're in grief. And we're just holding both those things. We're giving the kind of presence that we can, and it's still here. And definitely the person who has died in my congregation, just once since this began, I'm just really aching to gather with the people who loved her and literally touch each other and be in the same space.
Do you find there's a certain sense of calling to rise and become some expanded clergy person than you were before? Is there something pulling you forward that you didn't expect? So
I'll just briefly
Melanie.
say something since I do have to leave. I'm scheduled to retire at the end of this calendar year. And I'm very thankful that I'm not retired right now, because there is a sense of purpose in doing this work. And I do think that much as it may help other people, it helps me tremendously to get through this time, feeling that I'm able to contribute something to the world around me. So I'm glad not to be retired yet.
I think a lot of clergy probably just overfunctioned. Just, this all hits and all of a sudden we're just going to super overdrive about all the things that we think need to happen, whether or not they need to happen or not. And I know that for myself and a lot of our colleagues, we had to keep reminding ourselves to not overfunction. And because I think we felt like we had to hold everything together, even though intellectually and theologically, we know that's not what we do. But this kind of just all of a sudden this hit. And so I think the calling more felt like afterwards, how do I still pastor this group through this time, my particular skills and experience? How is that best utilized in the midst of this long-term kind of reality that we're going to live in? So I think it honed some calling.
How are you kind of pacing yourself, and what maybe are you drawing some inspiration from or some tips from in doing this? And I want to preface, we're going to go to Amy, but we might hear some background noise because some of her family are at home with her doing classes. So go ahead.
Okay, I'm summoning all the anti-perfectionism I have to remember that it's okay. You can do ministry if your child is yelling karate. I'm doing a weekly sacred text reading group, for example, with my church. I would never be able to do that every single week. People wouldn't come. I wouldn't be able to do it on a Saturday afternoon, which is sacrosanct family time. And the family said, we don't care. It's all the same. So I'm just trying to make the most of the ways that it gives back.
So a lot of our activities are on pause, and in a way that has given me a lot of opportunity to go back and study. Is something that I haven't been doing, because I always had these different deadlines that I needed to meet every week.
I think one of the images we used for our tradition is around coming to the communion table. And we've always talked about this table being bigger than our particular table. And now it really is. Like now you actually have to believe that if communion's going to be real when we're sharing it across Zoom and all of our tables. So I think it's made much more real, these intellectual, theological beliefs. And I think that is going to free us up to free our imaginations up for what we can do in the future. And I think that's going to be a huge takeaway. I don't think our folks even realize what their ability to see community differently, what a gift that's going to be for them as we continue to move forward.
It really comes down to looking beyond our boundaries, looking beyond, just even just who we are, but looking beyond it in the sense of, this virus has spread globally, and we really are, interconnected with each other. And this virus, it doesn't make a difference, who we are. It doesn't make a difference if we're, American or Chinese or if we're Christian or Buddhist or, anything like that. We are people, we are life. And even the virus itself is life. And so it's something that it's part of the world with which we live. It's part of the life that we have been living. And I think it's for me, it really just goes to show that each individual particle is so important in the makeup of this life that we're living, and all the more so then how much more we need to be grateful for the opportunities when things are going well, and then even in the difficult times, knowing that that too will pass, and makes all the good times even that much more special and precious.
We speak a lot about the interdependent web of existence in my congregation, and which doesn't just mean the environment, it just means everything is interconnected. And this virus shows how true that is, how we need each other, how we affect each other. Something we told each other when we were feeling so sad about not meeting together is, we can save lives by staying home right now. How often does that happen, that we know how powerfully we affect other people? And we can't see those threads, but they're there, connecting us. We don't know whose life depends on whom. So I hope we won't forget it. I hope I'll remember it and keep telling people after, what we call it, the great pause, or whatever this goes on to be called.
Well, it sounds like this phase has had its challenges, but that you're all rising not only to meet them with the technology and whatnot, but you're growing from them. You're seeing these positive elements that may become permanent. And in terms of the sense of community and broader boundaries out there that are changing, that you're going to lead us with new levels of insight and leadership. So thank you so much for what you do for so many others. And thanks for spending what is very valuable time in your lives with us today.